So, Piscal. If you're doing anything with, I haven't, oh, paint.net, yeah. That's a good point. So there is an, Photoshop. What's it called? I thought I had this bookmarked. Somebody made a Photoshop clone in the browser. Not Pixlr. Photopea? No. Shoot, he was posting it on Reddit a while back. Is this it? Photopea? Absolutely. This might be it. So it actually might be Photopea. But it's basically a Photoshop clone. This might actually be what I'm thinking of. Erebor. I'm not in a dwarf mood today. Hailstorm's probably not work appropriate. Nah. Okay, through 2 minutes left. All right, we need some trees up in this business. And then I need to refactor my code. Okay, if you're doing any spriting, make sure your transparent colors are all the same, because I wanted to draw these trees on the same screen. This is dark gray, this is light gray. I'm gonna have to key every single one of them. That's dumb. These are all the same. Harumph. Are the GitLabs still being graded? I was concerned when it was 0. I'm going to talk about that in a hot minute here. I haven't started grading them yet, if that's your question. Alright, tree. Guess, is this the same color? I'm not seeing color information anymore. Where's color picker? These are different. Shit. That's the same. Alright, so we're gonna do 368 and 32. And we'll pull this guy into 464 and 32. And class about to start, so I should put this on the back burner. Add some trees to my game. This is where my term project's at if you're all just joining. I have gone off the rails. I ditched Bearlib Terminal because it was a pain. I'm using Pygame. Lots of fun. And I'm also now learning about entity component systems, which is a very cool design pattern. But that's neither here nor there for you all. You care about the homework. So, no, let's stay here. I looked into the grades and I noticed only half of you submitted. So if you didn't submit your homework, please make sure you get that in as soon as possible so you don't lose too many points. So let me answer you in chat there, Cascohan. Generally, you have a transparent color that you key out because not every program can handle transparency. So like you usually use a hot pink, like FF00FF to delineate the different colors, and then you just never render that color. But to the homework, so please make sure you get that in ASAP. I'm going to start grading them pretty soon here, now that everybody's all submitted up. I am missing about half of the class, so hopefully the zeros that were in there didn't throw people off. But yeah, the zero was a typo, and I didn't want to delete all of your submissions that were already there. So again, please make sure that you get those in, because you start losing points the longer you delay. And if you're struggling, please reach out so that I am aware of that. Otherwise, I assume everything's okay. Or as okay as it can be, I suppose. All right, so plan for today. We have to finish up this section of requirements engineering, and we have a little bit of group work to go over later. So we're going to be doing that. And this is where we left off last time. So we were talking about requirements elicitation. Again, this is where we try to figure out what requirements we need from our stakeholders, right? So we need to take down their ideas, parse out what they're looking for, and put it to paper. So that's elicitation. And we started talking about champions. Right now, champions, again, these are people who may not be technically oriented. They're probably going to be some sort of a manager, maybe an analyst role, depending. But this is going to be a person whose name goes on the product as the main point of contact, right? They're the champion for it. It's a very businessy term, product champions. So with this, I'm kind of curious what you think. As long as we all understand what a champion is, I'm kind of curious what you think in terms of what issues this could bring. Now, let me caveat this, and I'll throw this up there so you can start answering. That's another slider here. So, champions are necessary. They're going to be your main interface for a product, right? They're going to be your customer representative, effectively, but their background and their viewpoint's going to be different. So, with that knowledge, I'm interested in what issues there are with this. And again, champions are a necessary part of the process. And just wait a minute or so for some answers to come in. Champion not being accurate to your target customers isn't loading for you. I'm getting at least some answers, so hopefully it's just yours. I guess let me try it. Skew what items a customer really wants. Yep. Come on, QR code. It seems to be at least trying to load for me. Yeah, there we go. All right, works for me, so could be just slow. So yeah, both of these answers are kind of the same notion, right? So let's pretend I am the product champion. I might be putting my own biases on what the customer wants, right? So if the customer wants a nice, slick, beautiful web interface, but maybe me as the product champion has a slightly different take on that, I might skew the language a little bit. Could be selfish, sure. And keep in mind, this could be completely unintentional too. You know, maybe I have different motives or different goals for the project than customers or something. So I might bring that bias. Now, I could also mentally discount things that they're telling me. Right? So if we have a meeting with a customer and I don't want to hear what they're telling me, I want to just keep in mind what I want. I might not be objective and parse things out correctly, right? So, yeah, selfish definitely could cover things. Deceptive or inaccurate, definitely a danger. And I don't necessarily want you all getting, a horrible bias against champions here. Just to really be aware that there are some considerations here. Are they necessary? Yes. Are there problems you may have to deal with? Absolutely. But honestly, you could say the same thing for any team member, right? If I have a new technical expert who is terrible with people, that might be something we have to deal with when we bring them to the customer meeting. So yeah, some good answers here. So this is good. Trying to insert face of Teddy. Yeah. So definitely some good answers. All right. So with our requirements spec, and this is more to summarize what we've talked about so far. All right, we get that software requirements spec, right? That nice, big, massive document. And we looked at an outline of what it contains. Obviously, we have our requirements. We've been talking about deriving them this whole time, right? We're also going to have something that we didn't necessarily go into great detail on, but your system features. So high-level descriptions of the various features that your product has to have. Requirements are derived based on these features. Right? So they're written at a higher level. It's still going to be technically oriented, where we can actually get some information out of it. But this is kind of serving, abstract is the wrong word, but it's a high level summary of what your requirements are defining. And then the bulk of things obviously will be the requirements. We have some dots for other aspects that are in there, but we're also going to have user classifications as well. So again, these are going to be the users that we are targeting with this product. Right? What is their maybe technical background or age range or various proficiencies? Maybe there's a certain domain they represent, right? Like we have medical as a domain, we might have automotive, it might be gamers, web designers, general business, right? And any kind of a classification that we can have to help narrow down the scope of the product and what features we present. So these are all things that are going to go into that SRS. So basic summary there. Once we get our requirements down, you may remember there is a box in our process where we have to start validating things. So this is where we take a step back and we go through each of our requirements and we make sure they are all correct. So, do these requirements represent what the customer wants? Do they represent our internal goals? Do they represent exactly what we have agreed upon for this particular project? Now, validation is a set of steps here. So we care if things are correct, first and foremost, right? And correct has a very particular meaning. Correct means that it is verifiably accurate. Right? You can almost think of it like a mathematical proof where, yes, we can prove that this requirement is correct. Now, if you have a sentence spelling something out, we can basically verify that. I'm just realizing that I'm clipping here, sorry. Tone that down a bit. We want to make sure that these requirements are accurate with what their purpose is. They also have to be consistent. And consistency is very key for readability and to have your developers understand things. Think to former group projects you may have had, or maybe different interactions where you've had to collaborate. And if you're all working on the same document, one of your group mates might write the intro differently than you would have. Then you lay down the background, somebody else lays down the approach or what your particular project was. Somebody summarizes the results, and they might be worded differently. Maybe it's just the tone of voice, maybe it is your tense or active or passive speech, any of those technical writing terms, which you will all come to be familiar with. But if we're not consistent in how we write them down and what their feature or what their particular viewpoint is from the requirements perspective, it's really hard to read and really difficult for a project to kind of coalesce around these. A few more of these here, they're kind of go hand in hand, right? So requirements have to be very clear in what they specify. There should be no ambiguity, nothing fuzzy that we really don't understand. Because if you give a developer a requirement and they don't know what it's all about, I might code it differently than you would. And that's not the goal of a requirement. Everybody should have the same input and output. And maybe the internal logic's a little bit different, but we should all arrive at the same point. They should also be complete. They should describe every feature that we have. They should be feasible. We shouldn't be writing requirements that are just way out of scope or that are completely unattainable. Could be a budgeting problem, a resource problem, a technical problem, but they should be feasible in some way, shape, or form. Feasibility might even be market related too, right? If you're an author, for instance, just to give you a different example, and you write a book that you want to write, it's great, but nobody's going to buy it. So it's not marketable, not marketably feasible. If you write for the current genre that everybody loves, what's the current one? It's probably not zombies or anything like that anymore. I don't know what we're getting into yet in the fiction world, but you have to figure out what your market is. That's market feasibility. It's still a part of this process. It should be relevant. And why is there somebody pulling up in my driveway? Interesting. Okay. I'll see if they come to the door. Oh, delivery. Okay. I love deliveries where they're not in a marked vehicle. Sorry for that aside. I should close my blinds, I suppose. All right, so they should be feasible, they should be relevant, meaning that if you're adding requirements that are not related to your project, we have to call them, right? We have to get rid of them. And last but not least, two very important ones. They should be testable and they should be traceable. Traceable we'll talk about at the end of the lecture today. Testable means that they should all have some way to validate that they're correct. All right, non-functionals and functionals alike, we should be able to have a check mark or a green box or something that says, yes, this requirement has been implemented and that it has been implemented correctly. So just keep these in mind as you write your requirements. You'll write some at the end of the day today as a preview. So I can tell you this all day and you can nod your head and smile, and I'm going to pretend like you're all nodding your heads and smiling. But we have to be held accountable for this too, right? So to that end, we'll do group work, we'll do techniques, we'll do meetings to validate these together. We might have review sessions with our team. So they could be informal where we just kind of get together, we look at our requirements and we make sure that everything's okay. Informal meaning that we're not going to maybe have a formal result as the output of the meeting, but we're happy with our in progress requirements. The formal side, we will have a structure, we will invite the correct stakeholders to the meeting, and there will be a desired output for this group meeting, right? So like we're going to check off that all of our requirements are correct, feasible, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and we can move on with our software process. Can move beyond reviews, for instance. So once you start formalizing things, that's where you move your current status marker in your project, regardless of process. We may also do something like prototyping, right, for requirements. So if you go a prototyping type approach, so the more flexible kinds, we may be developing our requirements alongside a prototype. So we have our current set of recs, we'll develop a prototype, test out its features, make sure everything makes sense, and then we'll take changes back to a requirements document as we need them. Right, so prototyping, throwaway prototyping, spiral to an extent. Basically, these are where we can have requirements be developed as we work on the system, even agile to some degree as well. We can also go a more test-driven development cycle too, right? So if any of you have heard of that term, that's where basically you build your software to pass tests. And those tests can basically inform requirements development. So we have various ways of handling validation, but the thing is that at the end of the project, or at least at the end of the day, you should have a process to verify that everything you've done requirements-wise makes sense, right? That you tick off all of these adjectives for what a good requirement is. And I keep going back. I talk about validation, verification, V and V once you get into the working world. These are two different techniques for basically the same end result. So validation means you're building the right thing. Verification means that you're building that thing right. Sounds weird in a way, I suppose. Validation you can think of as like test cases, right? I have something that I've implemented. Does it pass its tests? Was it built Was the right thing built? Verification's the other side, where we try to do things like formally prove that our system is behaving correctly. Very fine distinction, but verification's more of a formalism. Validation's more testing the real world in a way. And I explain that in terms of an actual system. This also applies to requirements. Yeah, as long as we're good so far, can keep moving on. Again, feel free to stop me if you have any questions. Hydrate here a little bit. It's super dry in my house right now. Okay, so we talked about management a little bit last time as well, right? Because we talked about the requirements engineering process. I asked you what management is and why do we need it. Here's where we kind of drill down into that a little bit. So managing requirements is effectively similar to code management. So we have version control, right? So we can attach IDs and version numbers to requirements. We have change control. I'm talking about these out of order now, where we formally request to update something in our system, right? Whether it's adding a new requirement, deleting one, updating one, rather than just update them in kind of a chaos-driven manner. We have to have a formal process to update things. Similar to like in your GitHub repos, right? Assuming that you're one of the ones that finished your homework. If you want to make a change, you're just doing a git, add, commit, push, right? But if you had a formal process behind that, you might do something like a pull request and say, hey, we need to fix this problem, or I need to merge this feature in. Right? So that'd be similar to a change control. We also care about status. So is the requirement approved? Is it rejected? Does it need to be updated? Does it need to be tested? Right? So what is the status of the requirement? And then tracing, this is a fun one we'll talk about pretty soon. Basically, making sure everything is linked up nicely together. All right, pull my status slide up so I know that where we are. All right, everything making sense so far? Hopefully. Otherwise, we'll keep moving on. So, first things first, let's talk about change control. This was one of our bullets here that we had in the last slide. First one. So, change control is a great way to manage something called scope creep. Now, this is a very important topic to understand, especially since I'm making you work on a term project for literally the whole term, right? Not just the last 2 weeks of class. Scope creep is that thing where you start off with a very well-defined project, and then you add a feature, and you add a feature, and you add a feature. And then all of a sudden you have not just this well-defined scope, but it has just ballooned into this monstrous mass of project that is completely unmanageable. And when we talk about scope in like a business environment or a real-world engineering project, we start thinking of things like delays, of budget concerns, staffing concerns, things of that nature. For your term projects, similar thing will apply, except it's going to be you didn't meet your deliverables because you were too busy trying to get everything that you proposed done. And that's why one of the reasons why I had you work on that proposal was so that we could start scoping things out for you. All right, so scope creep, just making sure my mic's still popping there. Definitely something to manage. You don't want a bloated project. It would be horrible, and I can attest to that. So what does this actually mean from change control, though? So let's say that we've done our elicitation, our analysis, everything is all set. Our software requirement spec is a work of art. Okay. If we want to make a change, has to be some kind of a request made. And when I say change control and all of these things that we're talking about here, I'm not sure why my keyboard randomly starts and stops working here. There is a system behind the scenes that's managing all this, right? It's not, here's my paper document, I'm going to fire off an email saying, hey, I need to change this. There's going to be a formal system in place, and I'll show you an example of that in a moment. But let's say I want to update a requirement. More than likely, I'm going to need to make a change request to do that. And a change request will effectively be looking at some of these different other bullets here. So what's the impact of changing this thing? Okay, if I add a new requirement, is that going to throw off the whole system? Is it going to be 10 months of effort? How much money does it cost to do? If I'm going to look at a different technology to try something else out, like a spike in your agile process, basically, but how much effort will that take, right? So cost versus benefit type of analysis here. Or does it impact another feature, right? So if I turn on my windshield wipers, is that also going to turn on my radio by accident? Or if I am playing a game and I hit 3 keys at the same time, is that going to cause something weird to happen because the game was not expecting that combination? So impact analysis is quite important because that's actually the process of you thinking about what this change will be. All right, so let's say you've done all this. Depending on the severity of the change, you might need to involve something like a committee. So you'll have to present your case. People will need to discuss, hey, does this requirement make sense? Does updating it make sense? Does deleting it make sense? So it's not just going to be you, it's going to be effectively a group decision. But if it's something like a bug fix or something simple, you might not need that level, right? It just depends on how severe the change has to be. And there's rankings for that as well. Last but not least, is this going to be a volatile requirement, right? So is it going to be horribly impactful on the rest of your system? Or do the values change over time? So there's basically a whole list of things that we have to consider when we start making changes later on. And keep in mind, I'm making this probably sound really dry and boring and like, yeah, okay, yeah, sure, whatever. But if we have a process like this, it makes a lot of sense to have that kind of support, right? So if you have to make a change, you don't want to make it incorrectly. All right, so version control. We talked about change control, now let's talk about version control. This is what you've done so far in GitHub, right? You've made your commits, you get that big long commit ID, that hex string. We have the same thing for requirements. So is this version 1 of the requirement? Is it version 1.1, 1.2? We can go back in time to see how our requirements have evolved. And if we ever need to go back to an older one, we have that history. That's what our version control gives us. It also gives us redundancy in case if something ever happens, we can always go back, right? But we also have this nice feature of privilege and access control. So the intern can't go in and start adding requirements that that person thinks would be super cool to have. And then that filters down to your design team and they just start losing their minds, right? Only particular people will have access to this. This might be a configuration manager. Usually that's actually a role at a company, right? You're in charge of the version control system. Or it might be your project manager has that access privilege for this particular project. So having the notion of roles is actually going to be quite important. That also protects you. If you start trying to make changes and you can't, it's also a good way to prevent accidents from happening. So let's say we've inserted things in here. We might be proposing a new requirement. So we have a proposed state. If everybody's happy with it, we can approve it. If we don't like it, we can reject it. We can also probably have a state of edit or update or something like that if it's a good requirement, but it needs some tweaking. We might also have implemented. So it's been added to your software requirements spec. We're happy with it. We've gone through a verification process and everybody's deemed that it's good. So basically, this list can vary environment to environment, obviously, right? Maybe your company has a different name for them, but the ideas are going to be the same. They'll go through a series of steps to get to released or verified or whatever your end state is going to be. So think of this as a GitHub, SVN, Perforce, whatever your version control system is. Think of that handling a requirements document, and you basically have exactly what this is. Now, let me pull up my... Oh crap, I closed it. Sorry, I had a picture from last class, and I closed it on myself. So we get to do another live Google image search. There is software out there. The older one is called Doors. Now it's IBM. It was Telelogic before. But this is one tool which gives you a very clear picture of requirements engineering. That is not Doors, that is Regedit. Here we go. This is a bit. Last one I had was extremely unclear and very blurry, so I'm sure everybody hated it. But here's an example of a requirements hierarchy. So this is your configuration management tool here. I'll pull up another one that actually has the sentences in there. But here we actually see specifications for elevator doors, custom objects, fuel station. So basically we have a nested list of objects. This looks like any GUI tool in the world, right? But every requirement is an object in the system. This object can have properties, right? Those properties can be the status. Is it verified? Is it proposed? Does it need editing, right? We can have a version number behind the scenes. We can have responsible for, so who is responsible for this requirement? In here, we also have traceability. So let's say this requirement 2, which is obviously not expanded, but this links to a set of test cases, this links to a set of design decisions, this links to a project task, which has a bunch of code that has been implemented. All right, so hopefully you can start seeing how everything kind of ties together at the requirements level. All right, so let me pull open another one here. That is not what I wanted to pull open. Open image in new window because this goes right to a product page. Yeah, that's super blurry. Sorry about that. But here we have some requirements with heading. So visibility at daylight. So this is a vehicle application. Users shall have maximum daylight visibility from within the vehicle. Right, so we're not doing tinted windows or something like that. Users shall be able to operate brakes in standard footwear. A bunch of hidden things here, but we see if we start drilling down into what this requirement is. Okay, this is an enum. Here are the max values. Enum is an enumeration if you're forgetting your intro to Java class. But again, these are all workable in a in an object-based format. And again, you might not use that tool. You might use something from Atlassian, right? So they're the people who do Jira and any of those other nifty tools that are out there right now for Agile. There will be something that you have to work with which is going to handle this for you. All right, so last but not well, this and then risk, and then we're on to group work. Traceability. This is something I am personally passionate about. I do research on traceability. Sorry you get excited, Professor Fredericks, now about this. This is where we start seeing where the holes in our projects are. So traceability, it's tracing in the slides, obviously, but this is linking everything together. And when I say linking it, we're literally drawing arrows. So think of your linked lists or your graphs or maybe any data structures you've seen in, your Java classes. Well, same notion here. A use case, which we'll talk about next time, use case can link to test files. Test files can link to requirements. Requirements can link to design decisions. Right, so we're basically looking at dependencies here. We're looking at implementation details, and we're seeing, do we have anything that's untested? Or do we have anything that is over-tested? Right, so there's a lot of information we can glean from tracing. So I've got some samples here, business rules, again, so like your business level requirements, design components, maybe you have features, maybe you have design decisions, architecture diagrams, and we'll talk about that soon, your different models. So how does this all link together? Well, we can put it together into something called a traceability matrix. This is not as exciting as it sounds, and I can imagine that you are all at home or wherever you are just so giddy to talk about a matrix. Basically, what we end up with is something that kind of looks like a 2D Excel spreadsheet, which, oh, it's so exciting. We love it. But what this is actually doing for us, and here we have requirement IDs and test case IDs, right? So we are linking our various requirements to a set of test cases. Now, question for you all. Let's assume that this requirement 2 has no test cases associated with it, right? So the green means that a test passed, red means a test failed, yellow is pending, right? So pretty standard green, yellow, red. What happens if we have a requirement that has no test cases associated with it? Question to you all. What does that mean to you, the analyst or the auditor or the manager? This is something that we often lose sight of as developers. Do we have a good emote? Oh, that's not a good but what do you all think? We don't need to test it, don't want to test it. There you go. Not quite. I mean, you could have the correct answer, but it's not the ethical answer, I guess. Let's put it that way. What's the bad thing about a requirement that has no test associated with it? Oh my God. Not like this. You can't be sure it works. Absolutely. Right? So think of all these, and these are requirement IDs, headache ensues. Sorry. Let's say, so these are all requirements in our requirement spec, right? So we have our SRS requirements 1 through infinity, because this is a massive project, right? These are all IDs linking you to the text. If we have a requirement with no test case, we are never sure if it was implemented. We don't know if it runs correctly. We don't know if it matches what the customer wants, right? So we have something that is untested in our system. Okay, so let's say I have a requirement value from our conversion function must return in metric. Okay, straightforward. So we have to convert imperial to metric. But if we never have a test case for that, how do we know if that's actually happening? Hopefully the programmer did their job right, but we have no justification, right? We have no report saying, yes, it does what it's supposed to. And that bubbles up and bubbles up and bubbles up, and then something later on impacts that, right? So we have to make sure everything is tested. Now let me take a step back even further. Let's say you're working for a company that has a safety rating. Okay, so you're working for an auto manufacturer or aviation or anything critical where life can be part of the equation, right? If an auditor comes in, excuse me, so somebody from the ISO governing body or TS, if you're in the automotive domain, they come, we have a big meeting with them, and they look at our traceability matrix, and they're looking to see where the holes are. And if they find a hole, there goes your safety rating, because you cannot prove that you have tested every single step of your process, right? So that's why this kind of a view is so interesting in that we have all of this effort being done in requirements development, right? We take that, we implement it, we do our testing, we think we're wonderful software engineers. But if we find holes, then we have to go back and fix them. And this kind of idea of traceability and why we have all of this configuration management overhead, this is telling you where those holes are. Right, so here this is just test cases and requirements. And we obviously haven't talked about testing in great detail yet, other than me saying we do things like unit tests and integration tests, right? You can also apply this to high-level design decisions. So my feature should be implemented in a certain way, right? Or we should have this particular aspect to our system. Or, here's an interface that we have to deal with. we can link any artifact into this model. So it might not be a 2D, easy to parse out thing. It might be something like a 5 or 6 dimensional or higher model. Obviously, you do a basic projection to see what you're looking for, right? We're not going to try to figure out how to do a, what's the 4D box? It's part of the Marvel Tesseract. We're not trying to do something crazy with visualization, but we're trying to see where the holes are in our project. And traceability is honestly the easiest way to get to that. All right, last but not least, before I split you off into groups, so we have some risks. And risks are not just me doing fun Google image searches for the actual game and Risk of Rain. I liked Risk of Rain 1 better because I was good at it. Risk of Rain 2, I'm awful at. We had somebody in the last class at 100% at Risk of Rain 2, so I was quite impressed with that. So some risks that we have. I'm just going to pop through these very quickly because we have to get to our group work. And I'll summarize them. So customer or user involvement, right? If we don't have enough input from them, we can't necessarily represent their needs from a requirements level. So we might be missing information. We might be overlooking user classes, so we haven't actually realized that there are some people who will be using our product that we never designed for, right? So if we're designing an accessible website and we've got it perfect for a screen reader, it's great, everything's lovely, but then somebody with color blindness comes in and can't delineate the background from the foreground, and then nobody can use the website. So that might be one user class. We may have issues with our requirements. So any of those adjectives that I talked about earlier, with making sure they're clear, making sure they're precise and correct, those are risks that we don't actually follow that. We also have a couple of other ones. So scope creep, talked about earlier. We have the very real risk of bloating our project in such a way that it's just infeasible. We might have a bad process. So if just anybody can add a requirement, that might lead to scope creep, or that might lead to degraded requirements where they're no longer accurate to what the customer wants. And then last but not least here, we have this lovely buzzword term, analysis paralysis, where I'm sure you have all experienced this in your lives. I've heard this term so much that it drives me nuts seeing it. Cutesy things like this bug me in a business environment. But this is where we spend so much time analyzing and thinking that we never get to the implementation, right? We spend hundreds and hundreds of hours just building up our requirements, speccing out the project, scoping everything, and we keep going in circles. And we never actually get to having a finalized spec. So just be aware that at some point you have to say, it's good enough, let's move on. Let's make some changes later. As long as you're not violating safety requirements, I suppose. Okay, questions at all from you? Let me make my big head a little bit smaller here in the stream. No, let's not do that. We want just me. There we go. All right. So in your Discord, I cleared out the rooms. And so we've got this 350 S1, 1 p.m. in-class discussion. So please start filtering into some of the various rooms. And what I need from you all are 4 requirements. So I want 2 functional, I want 2 non-functional. And please spell out which ones are which. And let's pretend I'm a project manager. Here I've got effectively a use case where we need a website for our online retailer. Turns out we're a home improvement big box store. I've got some pros here, which is going to guide your requirements development, but I just want you to kind of tease out 2 functional and 2 non-functional. You have till tomorrow at midnight to submit it. So same thing as last time, filter into rooms, somebody document it, make sure all of your names are on it, and just submit it after class, basically. But does what I'm looking for make sense? More or less? It's got some group activity happening here, so this is good. Group 1, Group 2, Group 3, I will leave this up. And other than that, let me know either in the chat or ping me in Discord if you need me to come answer any questions. But good luck. Let me get some concentration music on here for you. Let's go with some Simpsons Wave. Keep in mind you only have like 10 minutes, so it doesn't have to be super in-depth. Just do a good, honest effort, and we'll talk about them on Friday a little bit. I was intentionally trying to get away from the video game design examples because I want to make sure we cover everybody's interests. I know some of you are web designers out there, so. They are also, so the PDF is also in Blackboard. I updated it if you want the a local copy, but I'll leave it up on the screen. Hey, where'd the hype music go? There we go. And since we have a handful of minutes while you're all working feverishly, as I see in Discord, so that's good. If you came in late, please make sure you get your homework submitted as soon as possible, because I noticed there was quite a few of you that didn't get that in yet. So please avoid late penalties. Get them in. And if you're struggling, please contact me separately. Yes, only one person needs to submit. Just make sure all your names are on there so I know who participated. Hey, that's Gwen. Good. Mm-hmm. Can you go down and play with Mom for a bit? Thank you. I do. I love your hair. Okay. Okay. Look at you all in group 1 getting it done right off the bat. Crap, I forgot to hit record. Alright, 4K downloader, you are going to be the winner today. Be sure to grade you all in the correct column this time. Well, we got 1 minute left in class at least, so if you all have any questions about anything, please also feel free to dump them up there and I'll answer them. Alrighty. Well, it is that time of day pretty much. So, we'll talk about what you all submit in class on Friday. We'll kind of go through whether there, where adjustments could be made or not. I'm liking what I'm seeing in the Discord channel. But, again, hope you all had a good class. I will see you all on Friday, and we will start talking about use cases and UML diagrams and all of that fun stuff. So, I will see you all very soon. I'm having a really hard time talking to the camera and reading your Discord chat. Alrighty, bye everybody.